Hello and welcome to the Expanse. I'm the Quack and I hope you're having a less quack day than myself. This is part 2 of Flames of Dawn. If you have not watched the prior parts of this content, I highly suggest watching the parts prior to this one, or the full version of this content. Links will be provided. To continue from where the last part left off, beginning with the who and the what, we start with the very glaring implication I've been touting ever since I mentioned the Raven seemingly being connected to the moon and the Falcon seemingly being connected to the sun. Or more directly, am I saying Elune is a Raven and Anshe is a Falcon? The short answer is technically yes, and to explain that, we're going back to everyone's favourite expansion, WoD. So this notion of a falcon slash hawk, or more precisely if we're going for the lore specific term, a firebird, being related to the sun, and the idea of a raven and firebird being excessively powerful lower-like gods, which had their own ancient culture and civilization built around them, is not new. These notions were actually explored on a planet called Rakshar, or to translate, Sunstone. We know that planet as Draenor. The gods of the Arakoa, Rukma, a sun-related white-fire firebird, I'm just going to say phoenix from now on, Anzu, an arcane-related raven, and Seath, a shadow-related wind serpent. These three were the equivalent of lower/wild gods on Draenor and were excessively powerful. To give an example, Rukma created the Arakoa out of birds, Seath created a curse that not only lasted millennia but could also permanently warp the Arakoa and the other gods into flightless birds, and Anzu, where he lacked power, was clever enough to get creatures of the light and the shadow to work together. Now, am I saying these specific gods existed on Azeroth? No. Am I saying similar gods existed on Azeroth? Yes. Why? Well, because we've had confirmation for over a decade that Azeroth and Draenor share similar ley lines, and in turn a similar genesis, as in origin. And where there is an astounding amount of stuff I could go through that proves this, I'm just going to focus on the Arakoa and state a few factual statements about them and see if they sound familiar. The Arakoa are technically the chosen of the sun, technically the children of the sun. Or more precisely, when Rukma died, she looked like a second sun, and prior to that, the Arakoa thought of her as a sun goddess and thought of her as the origin of light magic. Sound familiar? How about this? The Arakoa initially created a light/arcane based civilization that over time eventually incorporated shadow magic. How about this? The Arakoa dedicated their civilization to their god and built massive structures as their new homes. Not only this though, they were explorers that mapped out Draenor in the name of curiosity and fascination. Oh, and they were extremely arrogant, seeing themselves above any land dweller on Draenor. They also managed to destroy their civilization through civil war. That I bet didn't destroy the planet, but did decimate their capital and homeland. These statements go on, but at this point I'm hoping the similarities between the Night Elves and the Arakoa are as plain as day. Otherwise, you might find the rest of this theory more crazy than it already is. And if you're curious why I haven't expanded upon Seath yet, wait for it. I guarantee it'll drop your jaw if you haven't already put two and two together. So at this point we have some circumstantial evidence that Elune and Anshe at the very least relate to a Raven and Falcon respectively. For the most part, this ties together everything I've mentioned in relation to Oldhim, as it explains Elune and Anshe being on Azeroth, why they were related to birds, why they were worshipped, and why the two could have been around for such a long time, as their Draenor equivalents survived as a light and arcane lower during a time where no others could. There's just one big problem with all of this. Even when you consider all the circumstances surrounding the gods of the Arakoa, and how they are supposed to be similar, not exact copies, just similar, Anzu and the Raven were never related to the moon or the light. So why in the world is the moon related to the Raven on Azeroth? This is where a very specific tidbit of information about the Arakoa and Xal'atath's statement about Elune
My mistake. It seems the upstart goddess still holds sway here. Oh well.
near perfectly cross. The outcasts, the flightless Arakoa that recognize Anzu as a god, technically worshipped two raven gods. One was Anzu, the other was Kalu, the Raven Mother, who, I'm not gonna lie, seemingly comes out of nowhere at the end of the Spires of Lhok, and as a fun fact, apparently New Draenor was going to be turned into Outland years before the fact. Kalu is a demigod, and was the consort of Anzu. He left her in charge of the Ravens before he hid himself from Rukmar. To give you an idea of who the Raven Mother is and why her personality is so important, here are two of the only quotes she states. Anzu always meddled in the affairs of mortals. One would think I might learn from his mistakes. Do you know why I allow these accursed, forgotten children of Rukmar to live among my flock? It is because I weep for them. They are trapped between two gods, one who fears and rejects them, and one who would enslave them to his dark will. Their only champion abandoned them long ago, and nobody has stood beside them since. Now, if that doesn't seem reminiscent of a certain goddess, here's a quote from Alaneth, the Arcane Mage legendary weapon. A dream of perfect beauty. Ridiculous. This world knows only pain, child. He says this when you place the Tear of Elune in the Tomb of Sargeras. Now, you remember how I said you can pretty much figure out what happened to the Raven in Uldum because of its corresponding statue amongst the Keepers being Isaset? I am hoping that's just clicked. There is a very real chance the Raven Mother of Azeroth was elevated to the position of the Moon through the Obelisk of the Stars, possibly by the Titans, and was then altered in some fashion to match her current look and given a new name, specifically Elune. This leaves two questions. A. What happened to the Anzu equivalent on Azeroth? And B. Why in the world does Elune, the Raven Mother equivalent on Azeroth, seemingly have the powers of the sun? I mean, she was able to alter the forms of the Dark Trolls and turn them into the Kaldori, the children of the stars. She was also able to create the Boomkin, or in the case of the Zandalari, a form that looks identical to the Arakoa. And if you didn't know, there are quests in the Desolus that show if you give blood sacrifices to Elune, she can grant you the power of a fiery vortex. As in, not the dark magic of the Night Warrior or the white light magic of the Priestesses, proper fire magic. The answer to the first question, what happened to the Anzu equivalent, is actually surprisingly easy. You remember how I mentioned Zul'Di and Zandalar had a connection, I just wanted to wait so when I mentioned them it'd click? Here's the question that ties them in. Does Azeroth have its own, evil, domineering, should never be worshipped or summoned wind serpent like Seath? The answer is yes, and it's a wind serpent you all know. Hakkar. Instead of a falcon or a raven, what lower are in Zul'Di? The answer is two wind serpent lower. What's in Zul'Ji that's not in Zul'A? A shrine to Hakkar, the wind serpent, the soul flayer, the blood god. The lower whose blood helped induce the nightmare in Green Dragons, and that isn't mentioning the corrupted blood incident. Hakkar's blood is as dangerous as Seath's, and their personalities are almost identical. Why am I bringing up Seath in relation to Anzu? Well, as the story goes, to stop Seath from cursing the homeland of the Arakoa, Arak, with what remained of his blood and body after a failed attempt to steal Rukmar's power, Anzu devoured the Wind Serpent and his power. This act saved most of Arak, except the Sethek Hollows, and unfortunately for Anzu, came at the cost of disfiguring his soul and form, ensuring he could never fly again. Now, looking at the Sethek Hollows, does this crazed Arakoa blood-ridden Maya remind you of anywhere we've recently been in BFA? Personally, it reminds me of a very toned-down version of Nazmir, and when you consider Hakkar's blood is stored in Uldir for no apparent reason, and the fact Rukmar moved the Arakoa to the mountains of Gorgrod to avoid the Curse of Seath before reclaiming Arak later, and the Zandalari left Nazmir for the mountains of Zuldazar because blood magic destroyed their civilization, I don't think the similarities are supposed to be that surprising. This is where the Raven and the Shock comes in. Which Cunning Loa has their temple in Nazmir? Which Loa has unprecedented normal and spectral ravens all over their temple? Which Loa has a power that's considered a curse has a very odd connection to blood and the wind serpents, and currently has a thing for a powerful priest that has magic seemingly related to the light. Yes, I am talking about Bwonsamdi, and yes, I do think he's Azeroth's Anzu equivalent. And yes, I am implying that I think at some point in time during the history of Azeroth, Hakar died in Nazmir, specifically on the location Uldir was built upon, and cursed the swamp in the process. Though when I finally get to the end of this theory, I guarantee there will be something you remember. Sticking to Bwonsamdi for now, have you ever wondered what those bones on Bwonsamdi's back are supposed to be? I mean, just to be clear, troll back ornaments are based off him. Those bones are attached and a part of Bwonsamdi. Now, I'm not going to say they are Arakoan wings, but sticking with the similarities between Draenor and Azeroth, in Shadowlands we just got introduced to a new species that just conveniently has wings, and where I'm not 100% sure of the timeline here, the funny thing about the Kyrian is that at some point we have to have seen a basic or very close cousin of the Kyrian. Otherwise, we would only recognize the spirit healers and the Kyrian would look like formless spirits. And I mean, would it really be that surprising if the blood magic of another spiteful wind serpent destroyed the form and soul of another quote-unquote god who meddled in the affairs of mortals, and possibly cursed those that followed the god, or those the god was supposed to protect? If you do get to the end of this theory, this possibility will make a lot more sense. Anyway, Bwonsamdi, Alud, Anshe and Hakar. In my opinion, these are the most likely candidates for the Arakoan god equivalents on Azeroth. With these equivocations established, we get the who/what in Anshe and Alud, the Phoenix and the Raven. This however returns us to the why and the minor who. Why have things turned out the way they have on Azeroth, and who's responsible? What saw Anshe stricken from the record and Alud seemingly gain the power of the sun, and for all intents and purposes literally take up a moon-like role in reflecting the sun's light? First instinctual response to this question is, it must have been the Titans. And I would agree with that. There is just one problem with that. The Tol'vir, specifically the Amentet, and the Alden Watchers. The Amentet are Titanforged who specifically recognize the Titans, however have an extremely heavy connection to the power of the sun, implying the Titans were quite willing to use the sun's power and not shy away from it. While on the other hand, the Alden Watchers, specifically Raj, follow this trend of using the sun's power, implying the same thing. So if not the Titans, then who? Once again, the short answer is the Keepers, specifically Tyr, or Tyr and Arcadis, but most likely Tyr. The other short answer is something older than we currently know of. Now, before I explain those statements, I need to set the stage and show you all of the hints that have been dropped about the sun's presence on Azeroth, and Tyr's possible relation to everything. Thank you for watching.